together to do with that, and it's a very, very nice life. It's a much nicer life than being an actress, so I'm very happy. And I must say, miss it very much, and I keep in touch a bit with what I've done by coming to things like this, so I have the best of all possible worlds. And I just draw and stick around in Oxford and travel with Richard. I was with the Doctor Who series for about a season and a half of actual programmes being shown, which means in terms of the time I was working on it, a couple of years. But of course it's one of those series that sticks with you. I mean, we're talking 1980, 81, so it's a very long time ago. And I have friends from Doctor Who still, so I see people like Mary Town and Louise Jameson from time to time. Douglas Adams is a great friend. Douglas, in fact, introduced me to my husband, so he's a special friend now. And in that sense, I keep involved with the programme, and by coming to the States to do conventions from time to time. And I've just been in Australia with my husband and done one or two sort of mini conventions there, which was fun. Well, I mean, it's quite amazing that years and years after you've done something, there are people who are still watching it and still enjoying it and still turning up for things like this. And what I find strange in England now is that it's being bought on video quite a lot. And so you get a whole other generation. It's like these kind of 15-year-olds who think they've just discovered the Beatles, you know. And they weren't even born when I did it. So I walk down the streets now and some kid of sort of 10 will come up to me and say they like Doctor Who, and I think, how do you mean you like Doctor Who? You can't even have been alive when I was doing it. And I forget that the videos are on sale on high street, so, you know. Yeah, Star Trek has exactly the same thing. Yeah. Was there more than one knitting book? Yeah, there were two. I did one called Beastly Knits, and then I did another one that was all animals, mammals, and then I did another one called Fowl Knits, which was birds, surprisingly. And I also did a book on embroidery. And then I illustrate quite a lot of books for a British veterinary surgeon called Bruce Fogel. Actually, he's Canadian, but he lives in Britain. And he writes kind of slightly jokey, kind of informative books on owning pets. I draw animals, basically, so it's lucky I married a zoologist. So I can still draw animals. In fact, I know more about animals than he does quite a lot of the time, which pleases me no end, because he knows more about everything else. Yes, sort of. He used to teach. He's at a new college, which is new in the sense that it was built in, I think, as late as 1175 or something like that. I mean, he looks good in the costume. Now he has a new chair. He writes books which have been very, very popular. He wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, which has been a sort of bestseller since '76. Now he has a new chair, which is Professor of Public Understanding of Science. So he gets to travel around a lot and talk to ordinary people, I mean non-scientists, about science and try and get people to understand that it's thrilling and exciting and more interesting than science fiction. Actually, he likes science fiction quite a lot, but what he doesn't like is sort of paranormal and superstition and astrology and stuff compared with the thrills of astronomy in real life. So he goes around promoting his books and talking about things like that and getting people to understand a little bit about where we come from and why we're here and all that kind of stuff, which is sort of the big questions. I just answer the little questions, he answers the big ones. But he doesn't exactly lecture anymore. Well, he lectures to undergraduates, but he doesn't take tutorials anymore, which is the Oxford system. Yes? How did I get my role in Doctor Who? Well, I originally got a role in a 6-part story called The Armageddon Factor. And Mary Town was playing the assistant in that. And I played a princess who, it was a rather nice part actually, and John Woodvine was in it, he's a very good English actor. So it was fun. And Mary at that stage wasn't at all sure whether she would carry on in Doctor Who or not, and she was dithering around. It was sort of coming up to Christmas time. She said, oh, I'll wait, I'll decide after Christmas or something. She couldn't make up her mind. So I never thought about it one way or the other. I wouldn't have thought about it even if I'd known she was leaving, you know, because you assume if you play one character in a television series, that'll probably be it. You forget that Doctor Who's not any other television series, and anything goes. And I think the sequence of events was that Mary finally decided, she probably knows this better than me, Mary decided she didn't want to carry on. And I suspect she might have suggested to Graham Williams, the producer, she probably might have noticed that I was amongst the rare little tiny group that got on rather well with Tom. And I think she went to Graham Williams and said, look, you know, you hang on to this person while you can, and they get on well together, don't push your luck here. So Graham then came and took me out to lunch, and this was about January by then, and asked me if I'd like to play it. Well, he could knock me over with a feather, because I thought I'd done my Doctor Who bit. Oh no, he said, that's no problem, you just regenerate, and you should become another person. That's easy. So that's what I did. I regenerated and came back, as you probably know if you watched it. Yes. Aha. Good. Well, that was the story then. Thank you very much, Mary. Yes? Did I watch the show before I was on the show? Well, I wouldn't say I was sort of glued to it. I did from time to time. It was a kind of institution in Britain that you stopped everything at 5:30 on Saturday afternoon, and you couldn't find a cab on the street because all the cab drivers loved Doctor Who. And there weren't video recorders and things then. So I would occasionally watch it, and I'm sure when I was little I did hide behind the sofa from time to time. Tom used to do this wonderful thing with children. He used to go up to them in the street and say, I've seen you hiding behind the sofa. And they'd go, and then the other thing he'd do would be to go up to them and say, and he'd sort of bend down if they were very little children and say, can I have your hand? And they were absolutely mesmerised. You could see their little eyes out on stalks. It's wonderful. But I've seen you watching television is a really good line. Somebody at the back there.
What sort of stage experience do you have? Stage drama?
What sort of stage experience do I have? Well, I have 3 years of drama school, which gets you through quite a lot. And then I did an ennui play called Ardell with Vincent Price and Coral Brown. That's the first play I did after I left drama school, which was a wonderful experience. I don't know if you guys know Coral Brown, but she was Australian, in fact. She and Vincent were married very late in both their lives. I mean, I think Vincent was in his 70s and she must have been in her 60s when they met on a Hammer horror film called Theatre of Blood. And they'd been married perhaps a year or so when we did this play, so they absolutely adored each other, and they were so funny and so nice. And Coral loved the theatre. She simply lived for the theatre. She was wonderfully elegant and kind of, theatrical, and a brilliant person for a young actress to watch. And she played my part as an ingenue. She'd done the same part that I was playing. And she used to come into the theatre in the evening, and she'd stand in the wings, and you could see her all kind of revved up, excited, and a thrill going on stage. And Vincent and I would be standing on the other side going, oh, God, let us out of here. We hate this. We want to go back to a studio and have some cameras around here. All this horrible live stuff. And it was a complete difference of kinds of actors working, you know. I mean, one who just couldn't wait to get out in front of the audience, and others who couldn't wait to get off again and go home. So I've never really loved the theatre all that much, and I've tended to stick with film and telly more when I could. But I've since done, I've had another ugly play with Leslie Curran called The Rehearsal. A play with Edward Fox called Another Love Story, another joke. Various things like that, but mostly I've done television. Somebody there. What's my favourite animal to draw? Oh God. I don't know. I really like drawing anything. I like drawing things that I haven't drawn before because they're a struggle, you know. And I quite like drawing things under. I've got a really good microscope at home, and I like drawing bits of things under microscopes. It's exciting. Brilliant patterns. If I were a fashion designer, I'd use microscopes for my inspiration. I think perhaps someone like Sandra Rhodes maybe does that. I've done one or two from Richard's last book, which is called Climbing Mount Improbable. There's a little thing in it called a feather-tailed glider, which is a tiny Australian marsupial, and it's so sweet. It was just such a nice thing to draw. And I've just been in Australia, so I'm rather keen to draw more of their animals, because they're so weird, you know. They're just so odd. When you look at a kangaroo, you just can't believe that anything could come out like that. They're just so fascinating. And you take them for granted. You know, you've seen kangaroos since you were little, but when you actually meet one, and there it is, sort of snuffling up to you and letting you play with a little Joey in its pouch and stuff, and you think, God, this is a real creature, and it's so bizarre, it could be off Mars. No alien could be more thrilling. Huh?
Yes. When you took over the role of Romana from Mary Ann, you played the character a very regal, sort of queen-like character. You're the more of a fun-loving, looks a lot like a fun-type character. Is that on purpose, or is that just your personality kind of character?
It was, in the end, it was sort of on purpose. The first one I actually recorded was the little creature from the pit. And you can sort of tell, well, I mean it really, you know. You can tell if you look at that my hair's peculiar and I've got this awful dress on, and I hated everything about the creature from the pit except for Myra Francis, who was so funny. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I was sort of trying to do a Mary Chan. You know, I thought Mary does it all glamorous and she's so good at that. And, well, I'm supposed to be the same character, perhaps I better try and be like Mary and try and sort of look glamorous. And then I realised, about 10 minutes into filming that one, that this was a dead end. You know, I was never going to look as glamorous as Mary, and it was pointless to try and copy her. She'd done it beautifully her way. And that I better do it my way, and that there was absolutely no reason why, because we had the same name in Doctor Who. We should have to be the same. None of the doctors were, so why should I? So then I finally, the next one we shot was the one in which I first appeared, which was Destiny of the Dalek. And the costume designer came to me and she said, so we want you in a sort of silvery kind of catsuity micro job for this. I said, no you don't. And she said, yeah, you know, you've got to be like Mary. I said, I haven't got to be like Mary. This is Doctor Who. I can be like anybody I like, and I'm never going to be able to be like Mary. She does her own thing. And then they were all rustling around trying to think of what I should wear when the Doctor first sees me and chooses me from all those tall and thin, you know, all those guys. And they couldn't think. The designer was sitting down with the director and they're saying, well, she ought to wear this, she ought to wear that. I said, look, you know, the only answer to this is he's got an ego so big that he's going to pick something that looks as near himself as he possibly can find. So that's how the idea came from wearing the same costume as him. Then they wouldn't quite let me get away with wearing it exactly the same all the way through, so I got my kind of pink version. But that was really how it came about. And from then on, I got into the character and I began to understand how to play it. And sure, it was more like me than me myself. I think you really have to bring your own character into these sorts of parts because you're doing it for so long, over so many episodes, that you know the pressure to play it as somebody very different from yourself wouldn't help, I don't think. I think you need to bring what you yourself have got. It's just difficult to recognise what you've got when you're following in someone's footsteps. It took me a while. I got there in the end, I think. Yes. Yeah. That you should do what you should do in whatever the situation is, and I'd scream like hell if a Dalek were after me. So it never seemed a problem. You know, I don't think Einstein would keep his mouth shut. It didn't seem to me that screaming equals stupid. It struck me actually that screaming was probably pretty sensible. It's just the way of looking at it. I take Mary's point. I mean, I think if she thought she was going to be his equal, then possibly she was deluded, because I think the Doctor always has to be the protagonist. You know. Well, yeah. Yes, and I see her point. And there also, I mean, there comes a point when you've run down so many corridors that look exactly the same that you get kind of crazy. You know, it doesn't matter if they're dolled up in some different, you know, sort of outside thing like black glass or a green forest. They're still corridors, and there are only so many ways you can do it. And after a while, you begin to think, have I done this to the best of my ability? Can I actually go any further here? And the answer comes back, yes, you've done it to the best of your ability, and no, you can't go any further. And then, as an actor, you just get twitchy and have to carry on. It's certainly easier for the Doctors because they do have a lot more to do in it, and they can contribute far more to it in every way. I mean, you know, not just the programme itself, but coming to things like this. It's obviously more fun for you in many ways to meet the guys playing the Doctors than just the boring assistant. But thank you, that's what I wanted. Yeah. Oh, well, sort of the same thing. I didn't want to leave it like Mary at the end of a story where I hadn't actually decided whether I was going to go or stay. I thought it would be better if they wrote me out properly. I didn't want to be blown up like Adric. Actually, what would have been nice would have been to blow Adric up myself. Maybe go to jail on E-Space. That would have been worth it, I think. A life sentence to get rid of Adric would have been worth it. So I talked to John Nathan Turner at the end of my first series, and after John had taken over, well, we just sat down and decided that I would do another sort of half series and go out in a proper story. That seemed to be a sensible way to do it, and he was very keen to change the look of the series. And he took my dog away from me. I didn't want to stay around without K9. He hated K9, John Nathan Turner. He really hated him. I mean, nobody but John Nathan Turner would have allowed Bill Fraser to kick him like that. I had a fan in Australia, in Melbourne, who got up, and he was actually really slightly crazy, and he said, who was that actor who kicked K9? That was disgusting. I mean, that was really, really horrible. This guy was in tears, and he was ranting at me. I said, look, you know, it's drama. It's really nice that you think it's so realistic, but in actual fact, K9 was fine, and I took him off into E-Space, and he saw the vet, and really don't worry about it. He was crying about the poor dog being kicked. Just shows how convincing we are, you see. Yes. Difference between the producers. Yes, Graham Williams was very different from John Nathan Turner. John had been around all the time because, well, he was our, what they call production unit manager, which means he counts the pennies. And so he knew the programme extremely well, and we knew him. He was sort of around and about. Graham was much more, well, he'd grown up with a more traditional version of Doctor Who, and I think what happened very much, this is entirely personal, I don't know if other people agree with me, they probably don't. But I think what happened in my time in Doctor Who, and it happened to coincide with Graham switching to John Nathan Turner, was that, you know, Star Wars came out, science fiction suddenly was really, really popular everywhere. It wasn't just Doctor Who. I don't know what it's like in the States, but I'm talking about England. That you had Doctor Who more or less ruling the roost on television in England. It was so popular, and it was it had very little competition. Suddenly you get things like Star Wars, where a vast amount of money is spent on terrific special effects, and people start to compare. Well, you can't compare something like Doctor Who with Star Wars. It's you know, the budget alone is just, you know, ours was kind of made out of old egg boxes. And I thought that was the fun of Doctor Who. I mean, that's what I loved about it, was that it was like, we've got a programme integrated here, a children's programme in England called Blue Peter, where they teach children how to make things out of old detergent bottles and milk crates and stuff. And Doctor Who was kind of like a glorified Blue Peter in that sense. We had very, very little money, and that breeds for very, very enterprising people. You know, you get designers who, given nothing, make something exciting. If you give a designer everything, he jolly well ought to make something exciting, like the Doctor Who film that's just come out. I mean, if you have a budget that huge, then the sky's the limit, so to speak. But we did it on a shoestring. It looked as if it was on a shoestring. The spaceships looked as if they came out of cornflakes packets. You could see the little wire. You know. And all that, in a way, kind of added to the culty pleasure of Doctor Who, I think. And when John came along, he really felt he had to keep up with technology and what was happening in other science fiction things, and suddenly it became more competitive. And I mean, you can't really compete if you haven't got a budget to compete with. And so you end up falling between two stools, I think, because you look as if you're trying, and then you're bound to look as if you're failing, unless somebody gives you some more. That was just how I felt about it, that suddenly we were trying to be much more technical and much more sort of science fiction in a different sense to what Doctor Who had been. And I don't, to me, think that improved things much. And from our point of view, it made it look as if it was John Nathan Turner doing it. I mean, I think John just had to do it. But if I had to go back, and I had a choice, I would rather work with Graham Williams again. Not because I'm very fond of John, he's a friend and I like him very much, but I liked the Graham Williams days. I thought they had more humour in them, and they were more for children. Doctor Who became a cult in England because it was for children. I don't know if you have this phenomenon in the States, but in England, grown-ups love looking frightfully clever by enjoying children's programmes. They do. They think it's sort of wonderfully funny to sit down and watch. We've got a thing called Magic Roundabout. Do you know that thing? well, it's got all these little furry animals in them, this little dog called Dougal and things, and that was a huge cult with adults because it was for little children. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't work that one out, but there's something funny going on. But then Doctor Who tried to keep up with its teenage and adult audience and forgot about the littlies for whom it had originally been done. And I think it lost something there, to me. Yes.
What do you think drama community perception in Hollywood, New York City, those who make the jump across the economy and come back home?
Did everybody hear the question? Britain's attitude to Hollywood and New York and those who make the jump and everything. I think we have a fantastic superiority complex about being good at theatre, you know, being great actors, and that somehow the movies were, you know, there's a kind of snooty British, well, of course, to quote Patrick Stewart, well, of course, you know, you're not really living if you're not in the Royal Shakespeare Company. What on earth do you want to bother with science fiction for on television? I would love to see Patrick Stewart and say, I beg your pardon? What? So we have a sort of superiority complex about rating what goes on in Hollywood compared with what goes on in Britain. And I think Hollywood has turned out some of the greatest actors and greatest performances and brilliant films, and I think they rate just as high as any theatre. And in many ways they require different attributes to make them good, but they certainly need a lot, you know. And I think it's taken us a while to understand that theatre isn't everything. Even our so-called wonderful television is now going down the tubes like almost everything else, you know. So we don't have that leg to stand on much anymore, and I think we've stopped being quite so critical about English actors who go and make really good in America. And in fact, if we're snooty, it's probably because we're envious. I think it's quite nice to come over here and be frankly successful here. I've never done it because I don't act anymore, so it's not been my ambition. But I admire English actors who've crossed the Atlantic and made a success somewhere else. I think that's a great thing to do. It goes back a long way. I mean, in the movies just after the war, there were an awful lot of English people settled in Hollywood, you know, David Nichols and people who were doing very nicely here. And they were treated in an odd way by the British when they went backwards. I have a great friend called Claire Bloom, who played Gertrude in Hamlet that I did with. Yeah, I agree. She played Gertrude and Patrick Stewart played Gorgeous. That's how I know him. And Claire, because she's had a sort of slightly odd career where she spent a lot of the time in the States, from the word go, and I think is a beautiful, beautiful actress, apart from being a beautiful person. Has a hard time in England. She finds it hard to work in England, and I'm sure that's partly a kind of, you know, sort of sour grapesy, well, we do all right over there, so why do we need it? It's not a very nice attitude. Does that answer your question? Yes?
What did you think about the new Doctor Who?
What did I think about the new Doctor Who movie? Well, I thought Paul McGann was terrific. I thought he was really, really wonderful. I mean, terrific casting. It wasn't his fault he got to kiss the girl, which is hardly Doctor Who type stuff. I mean, I think it pointed out what I was saying earlier, that really having tons of money isn't what it's about. And I think you can have a TARDIS that looks like a commercial for Visa card inside it. You can spend all that money zapping around in spaceships that don't look as if they come out of cornflakes packets, and you don't necessarily get a better thing. I don't actually remember much about the story. I remember thinking how terrific he was, and thinking, God, our TARDIS doesn't look like that, you know, a few things like that. But, so it didn't bear much relation to Doctor Who to me. But I hope he goes on and does some more. I think he was great. Yes? Yeah, probably. What got me into illustration? I've always done it. I wanted to go to art school when I was sort of 3. I mean, you know, actors are supposed to say, I wanted to be an actress all my life. I didn't want to be an actress at all. I wanted to go to art school. And the thing that I most hated at my school, the thing that filled me with total and utter dread, was the thought somebody might give me a part in a play and I might have to do it. So I'd do anything. I'd say, oh, I'll do the costumes, I'll direct it if you like, I'll do the makeup, I'll do whatever you like, but please don't make me get up there and do it. and to the point of practically a phobia. And I then thought, rather like somebody who's scared of heights thinks I'll go hang gliding, I thought I will put my name down for an audition to get into drama school, because I'm going to make myself go and do this audition. It's the thing I hate most in the whole world. And I got in. And I got in after a day. This particular school I went to, you did a sort of preliminary audition, and then if you got through that bit, you went at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and you were there all day, and you joined in classes on the side, so they could see what you were really like, not just in 2 minutes of an audition, which is a very good way of doing it. And I loved it. I had this wonderful day, and I thought, hang on a sec, why have I been so scared of this all my life? This is quite fun. And so I took my place and went to it. I didn't go to art school, but I did always keep drawing, and I've always illustrated and done jackets. I think it's helpful for actors if they have another string to their bow, because it's such a horrible profession. Unless you're fantastically lucky, you are so easily stuck with waiting for a telephone to ring, and you're so out of control, you can't make anything for yourself. Well, with drawing, I can go and talk the shell company into letting me do a calendar for them, or go to the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and say, can I do a calendar for you, or do my own book on knitting or whatever, and you feel in control of your life better than if you're just acting. So I've always kept it going as a parallel career, which is sort of why I made it so easy for me to stop acting, because I had other things to do. Yes. 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 Yes, Vincent Price was the sort of epitome of an actor who was capable of... Yeah, he did. Yes. And a lot of people do now who, there are a lot of actors or singers who paint, who, I've got a friend called Jane Asher. Is she known in the States? I mean, Jane has this thing of making cakes, and she's got this little shop in Chelsea, and she writes books, and she's a sort of Martha Stewart, and terrifically nice. I don't know if Martha Stewart's nice, but Jane is. I watched it on television this morning. I've never seen Martha Stewart. Yeah. What a thrill. I was jet lagged enough not to take much of it in, so it's okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're doing Shakespeare to make it more accessible to everybody. I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes they turn out to be good movies. I think on the whole, Shakespeare did a pretty good job. You've got quite a good script there to be going on with. And I suppose, I don't really mind if people don't want to go to Shakespeare. I suppose I ought to mind, and I suppose people ought to be educated and think if you don't know about Shakespeare, you don't know nothing. I kind of feel if they want to go, let them go, and if they don't. And if they go to a good one, so much better, and if they go to a bad one, that's bad luck. So I'm glad if people make a real effort to make a good film. It's sometimes sad if they cut it so much to ribbons that you're left with just a plot, because the plots aren't that sensible, but the history is not real history, and the comedies are pretty thin on the ground plot-wise. So what you should be doing is trying to make people think that the language is beautiful and interesting, and that it's actually really accessible and easy to understand. And often that is done. I think they've done some very good Shakespeare films. Yeah. I'm absolutely sure, I can say this with confidence because you can't turn around and tell me that I'm wrong, but Shakespeare, had he been alive today, would have been a film writer. These plays are filmic. They're all in tiny little chunks. They all skip from scene to scene, to and fro. They have an absolutely film sense, and I'm sure if Shakespeare were around, he'd embrace the film medium. He might do the theatre too, but he wouldn't ignore films. So I don't see why his plays shouldn't work very well on film. Yes. I'm never quite sure what comes on American television, but there are masses of these sort of cop series in England, like The Professionals and whatever they're all called, The Protectors and Yes. I can't, it's so long ago I can't remember half the stuff I have done, but we used to have a nice series called 30-Minute Theatre, which were kind of like half-hour plays on television, and I did some of them. I did Terence Rattigan. Does the name Terence Rattigan mean anything to you? He's a famous English playwright of the 30s and 40s and 30s. Terence Rattigan wrote this play It was called High Summer. And it was half of a double bill originally, and he eventually went on and made the other half into a bigger play and dropped this one, but we did it for telly. And it was all about cricket. I haven't got the faintest idea about cricket. I have no idea what cricket was about. And I was the only person in this whole thing that was supposed to know about cricket. Nobody else had to know, but I did. And Terence Ratchford took me to a cricket match one day with an English actor called Roland Culver, who was a very well-known English actor. And Roland Culver and Terence Ratchford sat there and explained the rules of cricket to me. This is when I was 21. And I now love cricket thanks to them. So that was my happy memory of that one. Yeah, I had my 21st birthday, and Margaret Layton was in it, who became a dear friend, and Michael Wilding, when she was married to. And when I arrived on my birthday, we were in the studio, and I opened the door of my dressing room, and I couldn't get into it for flowers. It was so wonderful. And we had champagne and a tea break, which probably didn't improve our performances. Anybody at the back? It's hard to see that far back. Somebody there. Oh God. They're all memorable for different things, you know. I mean, Patrick is memorable because when I played Ophelia, I had never done Shakespeare except at drama school. It was a very big part. It was a very scary role to get. And I'd watched Patrick on television the weekend before he did a series of programs about how to read sonnets with various other actors from the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I watched this hour-long program, whatever it was, quite late on Sunday night on telly, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to go and work with this guy on Tuesday and sit there doing a read-through for 4 hours and help. And Claire Bloom wasn't there because she was still doing Brideshead Revisited at the time. It's a long time ago, it was. And I'd learned the songs that Ophelia has to sing before, because I thought, we're going to have to sit through this read-through, I better know them, I can't just read them. I was so frightened, I was paralysed with fear. And I got to read through, and Derek Jacobi was playing Hamlet, and a wonderful English actor called Eric Porter was playing Polonius. You know, everybody was sort of starring, and there was me and no Claire. The script editor decided to read the part of Gertrude, and he was a man, so there was no female voice for the whole 4 hours except for mine. And every time I spoke, I said, sort of squeaky sort of voice next to all these guys doing this stuff. And it was really horrible, I was so frightened of it. At the end of the day, it was a marathon to read through. I went in the elevator down from the rehearsal room with Patrick Stewart, who I was more frightened of than any of them, simply because I'd just seen him on his television program the week before, and I was thinking, oh, please don't talk to me, go away. And he came up to me and he said, oh, that was awful, wasn't it? I said, yes. And he said, God, what a nightmare these read-throughs are. I said, yes. And he said, of course the highlight was your songs and everything that you did. And I thought, So in that sense, he comes up top because he's so nice to me. Charlton Heston's a nice guy, actually. We had fun on that. Who else? Oliver Reed is nice when he's sober. Really, really nice. I mean, he knows it. It's not sort of talking out of school, really. He knows he's absolutely impossible other times. I've been pretty lucky. I've worked with a lot of really nice people. I don't think there's anyone that would come out on top, you know, particularly. Yes. What's Derek Jacobi like? He's probably the most generous actor I've ever worked with, in the sense of generous with his time, actually Heston is as well, but Derek had been doing Hamlet for 2 years on a sort of world tour before we did that telly. So he kind of knew it, you know. And he turned up at the read-through and he said, look, I just want you all to know, he was really modest, nice guy. He said, I just want you all to know that I have been doing this for 2 years all over the world, but it was a very cut version. There are lots of bits we've put back that I've never done. So as far as I'm concerned, working with a totally different cast, it's new to me too. I am starting from scratch. Please don't think that I know it all. I don't, you tell me. So he was modest, you know, and nice and really kind to me because he'd work with me on particular things if I wanted to. He'd always stay back and help or give advice. Yes. Do I know who designed the TARDIS? Well, it's simply based on a police telephone call. You mean the inside of it? Ah, no. Do you? Does anyone know? I have no idea. I suppose, I mean, it didn't evolve much from the beginning to when I was in it, I don't think. I mean, it still got stuck, and it still only had little sort of wooden knobs to push around. It wasn't your Paul McGann effort then. But I don't afraid nobody sounded. Yes. Any funny stories from inside the TARDIS? Oh. We used to have a sign up on the inside of the actual TARDIS, the wooden box, which of course was tiny, which said in big letters, "No hanky-panky in the TARDIS." Which was sometimes quite tricky because getting into the real one, you'd have to squash maybe 6 or 7 or 8 people in, as we were all crowding through the door trying to pretend we were going into this huge space which we weren't. Well, I mean, the kind of stories are always things like things not working, and they're funny at the time. They're not terribly funny in retrospect, but at the time when you're being terribly serious and saying, "My God, Doctor, what is it? Open the screen," and the screen goes, you know, those sort of things are funny, but they don't really bear repeating that much. Yes. My worst memory is marrying Tom Baker. Yeah, it's not entirely fair, but it sounds funny. It was a pretty silly thing to do, actually, so it ranks amongst pretty bad memories, really. Best, let's think. I don't know, I mean, we were in an era of Doctor Who where we got really good actors, and it was terrific working with people like Graham Crowden. Most of my favourite memories actually are not to do with being in Doctor Who, but with some of the Doctor Who people. Graham Crowden and Tom and I really love this one, went to see The Alien together in the Odeon Leicester Square, where it was first played, which is a very, very big cinema. You know, proper cinema with a huge screen. And we were sitting there watching this thing, and we got to a bit where they're prowling around all over the place trying to find the alien, and they work out where the alien is, and then they try and find out how, they're working out how to kill the alien and everything else. And Tom said in this booming voice in the cinema, "Why don't they just go down to the hold and bore the alien to death?" It was just so funny. You know, you remember sort of little things like that. So I always think of Graham Crowden in connection with that story, because Graham and I were paralytic with laughter in the cinema. And so were half the audience, I mean, they were all cheering. It was an absolute fiasco. Yes, you're right. I don't have any children. I have a stepdaughter who is 12, who's called Juliet, as in Romeo and when I married Richard, she was 7, and she absolutely loves watching Doctor Who. It was my excuse for playing Doctor Who tapes again, because Juliet liked to sit down. And it's really funny with children. They watch things, the first time you play something, I think this is true of most children, they watch it and they look incredibly bored, and they sort of fidget and go, oh, you know, all that goes on. Then they get a friend round, and they sit down, they watch the very same thing, and say, "This is it, so-and-so. This is what she does, so-and-so." And you think, hey, you weren't that excited when you first watched it, but it all goes in, you know. And they like it the second time round better than the first time round. It becomes their own little classic. Yes? It's very hard watching stuff you've done. A lot of actors never do it. I've always felt, for me, and I don't think it's so for other people, but for me, that it's part of my job, especially if you're in a long-running series where you're appearing every week, to get good at watching yourself in a sort of disinterested way, an objective way, so that you are capable of sitting there and watching it and saying, "Oh my God, I've done that for the 20th time this week. I better not do it again." You know, whatever sort of mannerism or things, little things like that. So I've become quite good at watching it and not thinking it's me particularly, but sort of standing back from it. The first time I saw myself in anything, I did a tiny bit of a film called England Made Me. And I went to the Rushes at Pinewood Studios. And the screen where you go and see the Rushes there is the same size as the Odeon Leicester Square. So your head appears on the screen, you know, this enormous, and everybody else comes on, you think, oh yeah, that's John, that's fine. And then you come on, and you look like somebody from outer space. You don't look like a human being. You hear your voice in the wrong way, and you see bits of yourself, like sort of from here, that you've never seen before. And I thought it was the most awful thing I'd ever done in my life. And I then decided I'd make myself bear it and get good at it. And so I do watch them, and I don't mind that much, except when I do things really awful. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, and yes again. Whoops. There's this thing of separating character from the actor as well, you know. I mean, I suppose I didn't have to be quite so ghastly. Matthew certainly helped making him ghastly. I have no love lost for Adric whatsoever. John thought he was simply wonderful, and I met Nathan Turner, and I never could understand this fellow, and I thought, and the other thing is, he was such a little pill. You know, I don't mind saying horrible stories about him because he was so foul to people. And I thought, God, if you're 16 and this is only your second part on television, whatever it was, you don't go around being bossy with the wardrobe mistress and snubbing the makeup lady and things. You get your little ass kicked if you do, and I kicked it. So I dare say, when Matthew Waterhouse comes this time next year, Paul, good idea? He's not here. That he'll say foul things about me and I shall probably deserve it and I couldn't care less. Did it bother me, the press coverage of such a personal matter as my wedding to Tom? What makes you think it was a personal matter? No, I mean, you know, the whole thing was a fiasco. There is a phenomenon that happens amongst actors, and that is that they play a part for a long time, and they sort of think they are that part, and they sort of think that the other people in that thing are the part that they're playing too. So they don't marry Tom Baker, they marry Doctor Who, and that's a mistake. You know, that's a bad misrepresentation of the facts, and it can last as long as that person still is that character, and it still is a kind of role-playing game. And within that context, that's all the marriage was. I mean, the wedding itself was like another episode of Doctor Who. It kind of had no reality about it whatsoever to me, in retrospect, and I doubt if it did to Tom. We were great friends, we loved working together, we couldn't imagine not being together, and when I left, the obvious thing to do, wrong, seemed to be to get married. What a bad idea. So, I mean, as far as the press being part of it, it would have been odd if they weren't, since it wasn't reality. You know? Yes. Old enough to know better. 29, 30 maybe? Can't remember. You know, something like that. Something stupid. Yes. Yeah. What is my take on British comedy, and when I was acting, did I ever want to do any? Well, there's different kinds of comedy. There's situation comedy and plays that are funny, and you know. I did do a comedy series once, again with Margaret Leighton, and a terrific English actor called Charles Gray, who played one of the Bond villains, I can't remember which one, but he was wonderful. And it was written by people Waterhouse and Willis Hall, who are quite well-known English comic writers. It was not a barrel of laughs, I must say. It was sort of interesting to do. We recorded it in front of a live audience, and you got a sense of what it's like being in these British situation comedies, most of which I think are pretty dire, I must say. I mean, I know there are ones that have been incredibly popular, and I don't really watch television that much, and I don't think I'd go wild to watch those sorts of comedies. But I do think we have some very, very good comic actors. And it's a very particular kind of acting. And there are certain types of comedy, like farce, which I think are very, very hard to do unless you have worked hard at. And that's the sort of thing you do in 3 years of drama school. You learn all the different kinds of, you know, restoration comedy, farce, modern comedy, Shakespearean comedy, all that stuff. And they're all very, very different. And much harder than, I mean, making people laugh is much harder than making people cry. It's quite easy to make people cry. Anybody else? Right up the back.
How was it filming in Paris?
How was it filming in Paris? Rushed. I think we shot in Paris something like, over 3 days, something like 20 minutes of actual film time. Now, if you were doing that on a feature film, you'd have more like 6 weeks, you know? It was lunatic. We would get into the little minibus thing, and we'd drive to Notre Dame or wherever, and we'd film for 2 or 3 hours, and we'd jump back in the minibus and we'd zip over somewhere else, And in practically every shot, if you remember it, Tom is running somewhere, and he runs much faster than me, and it was really horrible. I was always kind of scampering like a pathetic little shadow, trying to keep up with these great long legs, kind of charging up the Champs-Élysées and things. I hated it. It was not the way I would recommend seeing Paris. There are better ways of seeing Paris. The good thing about it was the French don't know what Doctor Who is, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. Whereas if we'd been doing it in England, we'd been surrounded by people all the time. In France, you know, they'd look at this strange man in a long scarf and a girl in school uniform and think, oh, you know, they didn't take the slightest bit of notice of it. France is a very strange. Douglas Adams has a nice story, which was, he read this book, which is a terrific book called Last Chance to See, which was, yeah, it's good, isn't it? Which is travelling around the world looking for endangered species and writing about them. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's terribly, terribly funny. And very good. And Douglas's agent at one point wanted to get the book published in France, so he got onto this French publisher. And they said, what is this book about? And the agent said, well, it's about endangered species and travelling around the world looking for these endangered species. And the French publisher said, well, unless there's a recipe for each one, it'll never get published in France. Isn't that terrible? Oh dear. Yes. That's a good question. If there was one thing I could have changed about my part when I was in Doctor Who, what would I have changed? I don't know. I never had great ambitions to turn it into what it wasn't. The part was there, rather like the feed in a comedy duo. There has to be one leading person and one person who feeds them, in that case, sort of comedy lines. I never wanted to be competing with the Doctor for time, or you know, that I was more important. I didn't think I was, and I was quite happy to be in that role, so I wouldn't have changed that much. I suppose I'd like to have had a bit more time occasionally, and the one thing I would really like to have changed is I would like Charlotte to have been finished properly. Because it was a really good story, and it was such a shame that it got ditched like that. We were all so disappointed. Are Tom Baker and I still friends? I haven't seen Tom since the day I left. So the answer to that is we might be, but we haven't met to talk about it. Yes. You must have come in later. I think we've rather gone through that question. I got into it by playing the princess in the Armageddon Factor first, and then taking over after Mary left. Yes. If asked to reprise the role of Romana, would I do it? I might. Somebody's been in touch with me about doing a sort of animated version of it, like, you know how Toy Story was made, computer animations, of what happened to Romana after she went off into E-space. And I'm kind of talking to them about that, and that would be fun. I'd like to do that, because I'm intrigued by the technology. And they do funny things like stick little electrodes all over you so that they can mimic all of your facial expressions and then fed into a computer. And then there are probably people here who know far more about how to do it than I do, but that sort of technical side of it would interest me. And then after that, it's just more or less like doing a radio thing. So I'll keep talking about that one. I think it sounds a good idea. Does this round of thrilling applause mean I'm meant to go? Oh, they're hoping I'll return. Oh, nice. Probably somebody else's turn to have a go. But, yes. Do I have a favourite breed of dog? Oh my god. Yeah, to draw. Oh yeah, I draw dogs a lot. To draw, well, drawing's different, you know, I mean, that makes you like them for different reasons. I like drawing things like Hungarian poolies, because they look like Rastafarians, you know, they're all kind of squiggly. And I like ones with very clean outlines, like Great Danes. So I have a pretty wide area of preference. I had a dog, I don't know what I like. Canine, I think. You'd be most useful anyway. Yeah, nice clean lines. I could do K9 with a ruler. Yeah. Sorry, over there. Oh, yeah? Oh, yes, right. Yes, you say meant to be education. I take it you weren't educated. Probably. I don't know that much about it. It's called The Puritans. And David Warner. Does anybody know who David Warner is? Yeah. Oh, of course you do. He's at the end. David Warner was a terrific Shakespearean actor. He was the sort of Hamlet of his generation in the 60s. And I saw it and I got 14 years old. David Warner played my father. Sian Phillips, does she know? She's been married to Peter O'Toole. Sian played my mother, and I was called Charity Higgins, which filled everybody with immense mirth. I don't know why. They all thought it was hysterically funny that I should be called Charity Higgins. It was just a sort of combination of these two names. They both go out on their own, but sort of together they struck people as wildly funny. We had a marvellous designer on it called Disney Jones, who, I don't know what else he's done, but he was absolutely brilliant. We didn't have very much money, and he had this wonderful wheeze of making a whole town because it was in the distance. I don't know if it worked, but by building tiny little houses, because we didn't have enough money to build big houses. And then he had children riding around on teensy little Shetland ponies in front that were meant to be adults, so they all looked as if they were very far away. It was such a good idea. And it was just about a sort of early English family settling in America. I had lots of conversations with an Indian in it. I can't remember much about them, except that I did it with a sort of funny Arthur Miller Crucible type accent, which was in a sort of West Country accent. And the director was Richard Marquand, who did one of the Star Wars films, and he did The Empire Strikes Back. Does anyone know? Which one? Jedi. Return of the Jedi, absolutely. And it was a very, very nice man. He's died, sadly. So it was rather a happy experience. We had a nice time on that. It was fun. Yes. Have I kept up with any of the recent science fiction television shows or movies? Not all that much. I did see that new Doctor Who. I occasionally watch. I have a friend called Siddig who's in Star Trek at the moment. I've known Siddig since he was 11, I think. Sid's very nice. Sid's uncle is Malcolm McDowell. And Malcolm was a boyfriend of mine for about 10 minutes. A long time ago. And Malcolm's sister, Gloria, who is Siddig's mother, is a great, great friend. So that's how I know Siddig. I remember the first time I met him, Gloria asked me to pick him up at Victoria Station on his way back from school. And I went and picked up this shy, nervous little boy in Victoria Station and took him back to my little flat and plonked him down in front of the television because he was too shy to say anything. That was my first meeting with Siddig. But he's wonderful. Gloria has another child who's now about 13, but when this child, Thomas, was very small, I remember Thomas had a 4th or 5th birthday, and Siddig was there, and Siddig decided that he would look after all these children on this birthday party, and there were about 12 of these little boys to come to this birthday party, and Siddig pretended to be a waiter. And he was so funny. He had a sort of napkin over one arm. He would say, "And so, would you like your jelly now or later? Would you like to taste the orange juice?" And he was going around and doing this whole, and then he organised games for them. And he was so sweet. He couldn't have been nice. He's a very, very nice man. His wife just had a baby. You probably know all that more than I do. Is she in Star Trek too? I guess she is. See, I'm hopelessly out of time. But I do switch it on occasionally to watch him, and I do switch it on occasionally to watch Patrick, and be smug about him saying rude things about me being in science fiction. But I haven't really kept up with all that much, it's true. My husband's rather keen on science fiction. He thinks it's a very good medium for the airing of scientific ideas. You know, when science fiction is done well, it's a very nice way to test hypotheses and look at. There's a terrific book of Fred Hoyle's called The Black Cloud that he's very keen on. And some of Michael Crichton's and things. You know, they're interesting books to just read what could happen if. So I'm actually more tuned into science fiction now, in a way, than before I met Richard. Yes. Location. The most exciting location on Doctor Who, golly, they weren't very thrilling. I mean, Paris is supposed to have been thrilling, because I've explained, when you have no time, you might just as well be in anywhere, you know. We were mostly in horribly inhospitable quarry pits and sand dunes and forests and things like that, and I can't say that one would join Doctor Who to see the world. It was not a place really to enjoy the locations. It was always freezing and always uncomfortable and always rushed. And to get away from it, well, you couldn't get away from it while you were filming, when you were anywhere, because there was never any time. You just went back to your hotel and crashed and got up again and started again. But in between times, I suppose mostly I went back to drawing. I'm not very good at holidays. I'm very bad at planning holidays. I like going places to work, but I find it kind of difficult to think I will go to somewhere or other for 2 weeks and do nothing. I'm not practically good at doing nothing. If I do go somewhere for 2 weeks ostensibly to do nothing, I end up drawing like mad wherever I am, so I work quite hard. Scanning the horizon and looking up. I have to think of something really exciting someday. I don't know you are. Brilliant. If I had a chance to go back and finish Sharda, would I? Yeah, continuity would have a bit of trouble with the hair, but yeah, I would. I'd like to finish Sharda. It has some very good things in it. I mean, it had a lot of rubbish in it too, but Douglas is very inventive, I think, and some of the little bits that were shown, you know, in that video they put together were fun, and I'm glad that they used it. We had an awful time making it. Cambridge was absolutely hellish. Oxford's a much nicer place. I'm an Oxford person. Okay. Well, I guess I have to stop. So I thank you very, very much for coming to talk to me.